There's a secret medieval people never said out loud. The earthen wall around them wasn't just a shield against the wind. It was the only storage tank of warmth, standing between a family and the 30°C night, quietly squeezing the breath out of the world outside. They had no fine stone, no quality timber, but they had enough wisdom to turn soil, straw, and organic matter into an armor layer as heavy as a small hill. When the mix of damp clay, finely cut straw, and livestock dung still warm from the stall was stomped, pounded, and packed until it turned dense, it formed a thick, solid mass. The wind couldn't find a way through. During the day, that body of earth silently absorbed every tiny scrap of heat from sunlight and from the hearth fire. Then at night, released it back in slow, steady breaths like the house's own body. If the ratios were mixed wrong or the wall made even slightly thinner, the cold would seep in all night long, and the whole family would shiver until morning. So, every strike of the medieval builder's mallet felt like a wager on his family's future. Looking back, the astonishing part isn't the material recipe, but how they used their eyes and experience to create something people today assume requires modern science. And if you were placed inside that house, would you be able to feel the quiet breathing of the wall that's keeping you alive? In medieval houses, outsiders often assumed smoke was nothing but an irritation. But to the people who lived there, the layer of smoke hanging beneath the roof was the final thermal blanket that helped them survive those seemingly endless 30°C nights. When the hearth fire burned just bright enough, the hot smoke rose and got trapped by the low roof and thick beams, settling there like a warm pocket of air that kept cold drafts from sinking down and prevented precious heat from escaping into the sky. It was the blurred space between firelight and smoke that created a protective zone few modern people can even imagine. Build the fire wrong or open the door too forcefully, and that layer would scatter, letting warmth fall away as fast as running water, leaving the household hours of work just to regain temperature. Medieval people didn't read books on airflow, but they knew how to read smoke color to judge moisture, how to adjust the flame to control the thickness of that hanging layer, and exactly when to add wood to keep it stable. What shocks modern viewers is this simple truth. They survived not through strength, but through a fragile layer of smoke so delicate a single strong gust could wipe it away. So if you were placed inside that house, would you dare rely on something that fragile to make it through a freezing night? If the walls and roof were the outer armor, then the medieval floor was the thing that decided whether a family could survive a 32°F night. What modern people struggle to imagine most is this. The cold didn't attack from the door or the draft gaps first. It crawled up from the ground, from that frozen layer of earth that stole heat faster than anything else inside the house. That's why medieval people created a system that looked simple at first glance, but was so precise it left many archaeologists speechless. The ash-straw organic mix floor. They spread a fine layer of ash to block moisture and act as a natural insulator. Over that, they laid chopped straw to hold pockets of air. And finally, a layer of earth mixed with livestock dung and stray fibers, compacted with bare feet until it became a thick barrier that significantly reduced heat loss. But here's the twist. That floor was never warm. It was just not stealing heat from a human body at night. In medieval life, preserving warmth didn't mean creating comfort. It meant slowing down the cold that was constantly trying to seep into their skin. And just one poorly packed spot could create a cold point that made the whole family shiver. From night until dawn. Sometimes they had to move the entire bed just to avoid a patch of earth that looked harmless. When you understand that, you see the precision and desperation behind every motion of building the floor. They didn't do it for appearance. They did it because every inch of ground could determine a child's breath. If you lived in that house, would you feel that cold point beneath your feet? And what do you think the ancestors missed that you would do differently? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
Be careful.
In medieval houses, the door wasn't just an entryway. It was the single weak point the cold always tried to break through. That's why doors were built low, narrow, and heavy. So heavy adults had to bend deeply every time they walked in or out. Modern people might think that's a poor design, but to those who lived then, it was a survival strategy paid for by generations of observation. Just opening the door for a few seconds let in a gust of cold as sharp as a blade, sweeping away the warm air the family had spent hours protecting. The heat fell so fast you could feel the change in a single breath. Because of that, every pull of the door bar was done with quiet tension, like opening a pressure valve, while knowing that one slow movement could plunge the entire home into a chill that lasted until dawn. Here's the twist. The small door wasn't to save materials. It was to shorten the open-close time, forcing the cold wind to stop at the threshold before it could rush inside. Medieval people didn't have technical terms like thermal loss, but they understood perfectly well that keeping a door open too long was just as dangerous as letting the fire die. And if you stood before that door on a 30 Didi-Har's night, would you dare open it without thinking twice? On a 30 de Greifa medieval night, when the fire burned only until the embers turned dark red and the wind outside screamed like a warning, the bed wasn't a place to rest. It was a heat cluster, calculated to share life-saving warmth. Medieval people didn't sleep apart like modern families. They lay so close, their breaths blended into a single stream of air, forming a stable pocket of heat the cold struggled to penetrate. Children were placed in the middle, the elderly near the hearth, and the stronger adults along the outer edge to block drafts, together forming a survival circle where even one person shifting a few inches away could drop the temperature enough to make the entire cluster shiver. What few expect is that livestock also played a role in this strategy. They were kept near the house so the heat radiating from their large bodies would seep into the living space, adding just a few degrees that sometimes meant the difference between a manageable night and an exhausting one. But the greatest value of the sleeping cluster wasn't just warmth, it was calm. In the darkness, the sound of someone else's breathing broke the feeling of being surrounded by an endless winter. If you were in that house, where would you sleep in the cluster, at the center or the outer edge? In a medieval winter, clothing wasn't just an item. It was a protective system passed down through generations, almost ceremonial in nature. What modern people find hardest to believe is this. Medieval people didn't fight the cold with bulky, heavy garments, but with a multi-layered structure that worked like a living heat retention machine. They combined felted wool, linen, thin leather, and coarse inner linings into small layers of space where warm air was trapped and circulated around the body like hidden streams of heat. When moving through a cold night, Warmth from the skin slipped through each layer of fiber, then stayed there like a faint flame inside a lantern. To the naked eye, it looked like a simple, modest outfit, but to medieval people, it was a survival formula every weaver understood in their own way. Get the fiber density wrong, the inner layer too thin, or the felted wool not tight enough. Heat would escape as fast as smoke leaking from a hearth. Here's the twist. They didn't dress to look good, they dressed to live. And every layer was a natural calculation of how long the body could hold heat before the night became too long. What makes this system sound almost mythical is its precision. No books, no scientific formulas, yet they knew each small detail could decide between numbness or just enough warmth to sleep until morning. If you had to face a 30-degree night with only 3 layers to choose from, which ones would you pick first? Share your choices in the comments. Who knows, you might discover your own personal heat retention formula. On a 30-degree as medieval night, when breath turned into a veil of mist before it even faded, the clay oven wasn't a comfort. It was the silent heart that decided whether the family would wake up the next morning. Medieval people built their ovens from clay mixed with straw and organic material, packed so tightly that heat could stay inside for hours instead of escaping like in a modern stove. When the big flames died down, what remained wasn't emptiness, but a coal bed. A layer of glowing embers burning slow, giving off light, persistent warmth, like the last breaths of a creature guarding the home. As long as the right thickness of ash was kept over it, the warmth could last until dawn. But here's the twist. Add the ash too early, and the embers suffocated and died. Add it too late, and the heat rose and vanished into the roof, turning the house icy cold within minutes. That's why maintaining the coal bed was an art every family had to learn. No margin for error, no experiments. It was a moment when the firekeeper practically had to listen to the embers to know when to cover them, as if they were speaking with the life of the entire household. If it were you, on a night that long, how long would you stay awake to guard the fire? Or would you trust the coal bed to hold its warmth until sunrise? On a 30-degree medieval night, a hot meal wasn't comfort. It was the moment that kept a body from slipping into dangerous cold. With too little firewood to boil pots of water, they cooked without water, heating river stones until they glowed dark red, placing them into clay pots or tiny oven pockets so the warmth from the stones could spread slowly, cooking food through stored heat. When the pot was lifted from the hearth, the family immediately gathered around. Not to eat yet, but to catch the last wisps of warmth escaping from the ceramic walls. A fragile heat, sometimes more precious than the meat inside. The contrast was stark. Outside, the cold wind was like a silent blade, and inside, the rising warmth faded so quickly that a few minutes' delay made it vanish entirely. Here's the twist. On a 32-degree night, the meal wasn't meant to fill the stomach. It was meant to keep the body from dimming like embers about to die, to hold enough warmth inside so they could sleep without shaking uncontrollably. In that situation, what do you think mattered more? The flavor of the food, or the brief burst of heat it gave before the night grew even colder? On a 32-degree medieval night, a blanket wasn't an item. It was a cold exemption decree. Every family had to create from whatever they could find. No one had fine textiles or perfect furs like romantic stories claim. What they truly held each night were blankets patched from torn clothes, rotting sacks, scorched burlap, coarse wool, scrap leather, and rough linings still stained with hearth ash. Once stitched together, they were as heavy as a small stone slab, but that weight pressed warmth back into the body, keeping it from leaking out like smoke through the roof. And to keep the blankets from getting damp, they hung them on beams to be smoked, the smoke clinging to the fibers, giving them a sharp, earthy smell that protected them from mold, from wet cold, from the night fog that could seep straight through human skin. The drama lies here. Losing a blanket wasn't losing a possession. It was losing the family's final shield. Villages had seen winters where a household gave their only blanket to the children, while the adults curled up and endured the cold all night. Not because they were weak, but because they understood blankets were survival politics. Who was weaker? Who needed heat more? Who had the highest right to live through the crisis? And the biggest twist is this: medieval blankets smelled of smoke, sweat, even livestock, but no one dared let go. Remove it for just 1 minute, and the warmth slipped away as if it had never existed. If you were there, would you keep that blanket for yourself, or would you give it to someone else? There's one thing anyone who studies the medieval world eventually realizes. Winter back then wasn't a test of strength, but an examination of wisdom. Because at 30 sous de greffe, where the cold didn't kill instantly, but wore a person down hour by hour, what saved a family wasn't the power of their arms, but their ability to understand every draft, every blanket, every spark of fire, as if each one carried the weight of a life. Here's the light hook, losing even one of the 9 techniques we just explored. A wall mixed wrong, a smoke layer that escaped too fast, a sleeping cluster spread too far apart, or a blanket left unsmoked. Sometimes a single night was enough to leave an entire household exhausted. That makes us realize the medieval era wasn't an age of primitiveness, but an age of absolute attentiveness. Every tiny detail was a link in a survival system so refined that even the modern world must bow its head to learn from it. And the lesson is simpler than most people think. What kept them alive wasn't fire, wood, or luck. It was the ability to see solutions in things that looked ordinary. It was the wisdom of people with only a few crude tools who still understood nature like an open book. If you were placed in a medieval winter night with no electricity, no comforts, just your own breath and a handful of ancient techniques, how long do you think you'd last? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might open a new perspective for this very video. And if you want to follow more of these mysterious ancient survival journeys, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the next stories.